Now, let's make sure you're not confused about something. We're not talking about the beginning of the internet itself. Most people use the words internet and web as if they're the same thing. But, in fact, the internet is much older than the web, and they're two different things. Today, 30 years later, that idea is still exciting. The web is just part of the internet, but it is the part that connects us to the rest of the world. The telephone meant that one person could connect with one other person. Television meant that one person's ideas could reach millions of people in their homes. North America and Europe make up only 15% of the world's population, but together they make up 25% of the world's internet users. Compare this with Africa, which makes up 17% of the world's population, but only 36% of its people have internet access. The digital divide isn't only geographical. If we compare men's and women's access to the internet, World Wide Web Foundation research shows that women are less likely to use the internet in many poor urban communities. 37% of women versus 59% of men surveyed were internet users. Indigenous people are the first people to live in a particular place, the original population that first created a community on that land before other people came to live in, conquer or colonize the area. People self-identify as indigenous. That means they decide for themselves whether they consider themselves to be indigenous. There are more than 350 million indigenous people living in 90 countries. They represent 5,000 different cultures and speak the great majority of the thousands of languages that are spoken around the world today. Indigenous communities often have distinct beliefs, culture and customs. Making sure indigenous peoples have legal rights over their land and resources is a matter of human rights. It also brings environmental benefits to the planet. Deforestation rates in Bolivia, Brazil and Colombia were 2 to 3 times lower in forests officially belonging to indigenous communities. Despite the progress made, indigenous communities still legally own only a very small percentage of their land globally. The UN document is an important step, but more countries need to commit to it, and the countries that have signed need to do what they have promised. All around the world, indigenous people are fighting for their rights, as well as protesting against deforestation and climate change. Many indigenous peoples do not have control over their land. Governments and companies take their land to cut down trees, to farm cows or for other activities that use these natural resources and damage the environment. This often forces indigenous people to leave their land, losing their ancestral homes and their source of wealth and food. This is a day to remember the brave humanitarian workers whose daily work can involve terrible dangers and even a risk to their lives. However, It is also a day to build public support for the people at the center of this humanitarian work, the many millions of civilians around the world whose lives have been affected by conflict. Introverts tend to recharge by spending time alone. They lose energy from being around people for long periods of time, particularly large crowds. Extroverts, on the other hand, gain energy from other people. Extroverts actually find their energy is sapped when they spend too much time alone. They recharge by being social. In recent years, the UN has promoted this online hashtag. Its message is very clear. Humanitarian workers have just one mission: to help people in need. And they should be able to do this in safe conditions. They should not be a target. At the same time, these workers travel to very dangerous places to provide aid for innocent civilians who have not chosen to live in conflict. For most people, life is getting busier and busier. Technology means that we always have something to do and there isn't much opportunity to just be. People are often doing 2 or 3 things at the same time, texting while watching TV, or even looking at their phone while walking along the pavement. The history of our world is a story of migration, diversity, empire, and belonging. But these topics are not often taught in schools. Black History Month is about teaching ourselves fully and fairly about our history, and not just looking at it from one point of view. Following the killing of George Floyd in the USA in May 2020, there has been huge international support for the Black Lives Matter protests for racial justice. People want to talk about racism in our society, in our educational, political, and justice systems. Part of this change involves thinking about how we educate ourselves and others about history. The Black Curriculum is a group started by young people who want Black British history to be taught in UK schools. They say that learning about empire, movement and migration helps young people build a sense of identity and improve social cohesion. Vegetarians don't eat meat or fish, but they can eat eggs, honey and dairy products, but vegans don't eat any animal-based food products. Vegans argue that suffering is caused in the production of these foods. For example, they say that, on some dairy farms, male calves are killed because they are too expensive to keep. Welfare has a special political meaning to the United States because it refers to how the poor receives financial aid. In comparison, welfare services are regarded as a universal right in other regions like Europe, where it is believed that all citizens should be able to obtain a minimal level of social support and well-being. For many people, The main reason for going vegan is probably that they believe that animals and all other sentient beings should have the right to life and freedom. However, there are other reasons. Vegans argue that the production of meat and other animal products is very bad for the environment. On the 1st of November every year, vegans all over the world celebrate their way of life. There are workshops, exhibitions and public debates on World Vegan Day, and it is a wonderful opportunity for anybody thinking of becoming a vegan to learn more about the subject. The celebrations have remained mostly the same for hundreds of years, although people nowadays don't go to church as part of the day. Most towns and villages organize public displays where you can stand by huge bonfires and watch the fireworks as you eat a toffee apple or a hot snack. This year will see the 26th United Nations Climate Change Conference. These events are also known as COPs, which stands for Conference of the Parties. The conference was due to take place in 2020, but it was postponed because of the COVID-19 pandemic. The Paris Agreement represented an important moment in the climate change process because it was the first time there was a legal agreement bringing countries together to act. Since then, 190 countries have joined the Paris Agreement. The goal is to keep global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius, ideally 1.5 degrees Celsius. Free trade is an economic policy under which the government does not interfere with trade. No tariffs are applied to imports or exports, and people are allowed to trade goods and services as they please. Supply and demand dictate the prices for which goods and services sell and are the only factors that determine how resources are allocated in society. Few people would disagree with the idea that a kind action is good for the soul. It is a win-win situation. leading to a sense of well-being both for the receiver of this kind gesture, as well as for the person who does the action. As a simple example, let's imagine you have a workmate who always does a very good job. Many organizations try to encourage people to do kind acts, wherever and whenever they can. The idea behind this is that it doesn't take any major plan to be kind, just a little bit of effort. Perhaps the strongest supporters of this idea are the Random Acts of Kindness (RAK) Foundation, who work with schools and companies to teach people kindness skills. As far as politics go, the responses are just as varied. Mitigation is common and calls for a reduction of emissions and less reliance on fossil fuels. Coal-burning power plants are now replaced with hydraulic power plants and electric cars are replacing some gasoline-efficient cars. Many people, however, feel that this is not enough. The Office of Personnel Management was the target of the attack, but data from nearly every government agency was stolen. US investigators say they believe Chinese hackers were behind the breach. How about taking a moment to mention this to them, just in conversation or perhaps by email? The effects of this will probably be quite clear. Your workmate will be happy to receive some praise and, in addition, you will probably feel good about yourself for having spread a little joy.